Good evening to those of you in Canada, and good morning to all our colleagues in Beijing. Thank you all for joining us for this panel discussion, Nature and Humanity as One, how the Western idea of Genius Loci intersects with Indigenous and Chinese wisdom and practices relating to landscape. My name is Catherine Croston, and I'm the Executive Director and Chief Curator of the Art Gallery of Alberta. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are hosting this event from Edmonton, Amasquatchie Waskihikan, in Treaty 6 territory and Region 4 of the Métis Nation of Alberta. We acknowledge this as the traditional and ancestral home of the Nahiawak Cree, Anishinaabe, Saulteaux, Nistapi, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, Dene, and Métis peoples, and acknowledge the many Indigenous, First Nations, and Inuit people who make Alberta their home today. We know that this acknowledgement is just one small recognition of the work we need to do to address and reverse the ongoing impacts of colonization. Tonight's conversation is being presented as a partnership between the China Institute at the University of Alberta and the Art Gallery of Alberta in association with our current exhibition, Cornelia Oberlander, Genius Loci. This exhibition explores the work of the internationally renowned Canadian landscape architect Cornelia Oberlander, who, from the 1950s until the present, has revealed new ways of understanding the human connection to the natural environment. The concept of Genius Loci has been used to refer to Oberlander's skillful approach to design that results in the timeless and site-specific landscapes. In classical Roman literature, a Genius Loci was the protective spirit of a place. Oberlander, as a landscape architect, is the modern equivalent of this. Her designs advocate for an amplification of what already exists in a place, not the interruption of it. With her public work frequently located in urban environments, she seeks to soften the harshness of city life by offering spaces of respite in micro-natural environments through the employment of scented plants, pools, and falls of water, or the simple pleasure of a lone fruit tree. Through the lens of Genius Loci, this exhibition explores how Oberlander works to reveal connections that create community and foster a deeper alignment with the ecology and the natural environment. It was with great regret that we learned of Cornelia Oberlander's passing on May 22nd, just a month before her 100th birthday. We extend our condolences to her family and are so very grateful that Cornelia was able to play an active role in the development of our exhibition and accompanying publication, and that we were able to realize both within her lifetime. I would like to acknowledge the Poole Family Foundation and the Edmonton Community Foundation who support the Poole Center of Design at the AGA. The Cornelia Oberlander exhibition and this discussion are being presented as part of the Poole Center of Design programming. I would also like to thank EPCOR, who provides support for all AGA online programming through their Heart and Soul Fund. We are very happy that tonight's panel discussion marks the beginning of a new partnership between the Art Gallery of Alberta and the China Institute at the University of Alberta. It is now my great honor to be able to introduce Jia Wang, Interim Director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta, who will share some welcoming remarks.
Well, thank you, Catherine. Good evening, bonsoir, oki, 早上好. Welcome everyone from Canada, China, and around the world to our webinar, jointly hosted by the Alberta Art Gallery and the China Institute at the University of Alberta. My name is Jia Wang, or Wang Jia, as it's known in Chinese, the culture I grew up in. The China Institute is Canada's only research think tank focused solely on China studies. We strive to generate and disseminate knowledge that supports in-depth understanding of today's China and encourage policy development in response to China's evolving role in the world. We're so honored and delighted to have such a distinguished panel of speakers. Joining us today are Dr. Harvey Locke from Banff, Canada, Dr. Leroy Little Bear from Lethbridge, Canada, and Dr. Yang Rui from Beijing, China, my hometown. Our webinar today will start by presentations by our speakers, which will be followed by a moderated discussion and Q&A. We encourage our audience members to submit your questions using the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We have over 200 registrants, so we will try our best to accommodate as many questions as possible. This event will be recorded and the recording will be made available to you shortly. Our conversation today will explore how different cultures perceive the relationship between humans and the natural environment and how these perceptions are put into practice in landscape design. I hope that at the end of this session, despite our varied cultures, backgrounds, history, and geographic locations, we could come to some common understanding. In a world where differences are often highlighted and even exploited by some to fan hatred and divisiveness, it's perhaps particularly meaningful to shed some light on how much we actually have in common. This recognition of certain shared values, interests, and even practices, not only among us, but also perhaps all the beings, earthlings, will hopefully help shape the principles underpinning our collective efforts to tackle global challenges such as climate change, environmental degradation, biodiversity preservation. Now it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce our moderator today, Dr. Harvey Locke. Harvey is the co-founder and senior advisor for Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative and Nature Needs Have. And he's also one of our own. He's a senior fellow, Nature and Environment at the China Institute. Harvey is a conservationist, writer, and a photographer who is widely recognized as a global leader in parks, wilderness, and large landscape conservation. Named one of Canada's leaders for the 21st century by Time magazine, Harvey received many international awards. Since 2018, he has been very active in China, including serving as an expert member of the China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development, and working with members of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and Ministry of Environment and Ecology. Without further ado, Harvey, the virtual floor is yours.
That's a lovely introduction. I'm delighted to be here, and you know, we are so lucky in Alberta, Canada, to have something like the China Institute. It's truly a provincial treasure. It's one of the great things that makes us worldly in our province, and I'm so pleased that we can do this event together with the China Institute, which also has a fantastic Chinese art collection, the McTaggart collection, and with the Art Gallery of Alberta, which has this magnificent building with a magnificent collection in the heart of Edmonton, and the Pool Design Center, which gets us thinking about these questions about what we want to do with the world we live in and how beautiful it could be. So this is just an ideal evening, and to have a chance to do an evening with my friends and colleagues, Yang Ray and Leroy Little Bear, is just a dream come true. So what I'm going to do is set up the ideas, and then we'll go to Yang Ray, and then Leroy Little Bear will speak, and then we'll do our Q&A at the end. But I hope everybody has a lot of fun tonight. So I'm going to start by a little PowerPoint that I'm about to share. Sure hope this works. Looks like it might. See if I can get it full screen. Yes, we should be good. So here we go. As Catherine said when she introduced things, we're celebrating the magnificent lifetime achievements of Cornelia Hahn Oberlander, who was a genius herself, and who, you know, there was a lovely obituary to her in the New York Times today. This is a very impressive Canadian and impressive human on planet Earth. The exhibit at the Art Gallery of Alberta is a great opportunity to talk about that, and this is one of her great accomplishments, the legislative grounds of the Northwest Territories, which I have seen in person, which is a building that fits right into this beautiful and strange setting that Yellowknife is, which is with ponds and rocky outcrops, a very pretty place, and with a pretty building and a magnificently integrated landscaping plan that makes you think that the building grew organically out of the site instead of was dropped in. She did many other famous projects like the Robson Square project in Vancouver. And many people think of this idea of a genius loci, meaning the person who was a genius of that place. It's sort of personalized to the individual, meaning, you know, this person was a genius. If you've read Landscape and Memory by Simon Schama, he talks about a genius of a place in the Fontainebleau Woods south of Paris. But actually there's another, and I find even more interesting meaning to that word. And it relates to the context of the environment. And here's a couple of quotes from Cornelia Oberlander that I think get at this deeper idea. So these are just some quotes I harvested from various things of hers while I was doing my research to get ready. If we want to maintain biodiversity and keep the world green with healthy cities and healthy people, there is no time to lose. Urgency. Our well-being on this earth depends on the state of the health of the environment. We're part of nature. But above all, develop and practice an ethical, aesthetic, and caring design and building process. Interesting. Let the land dictate a horticultural response. And I noticed she quoted Barry Lopez for his passage in his book, Arctic Dreams, where he says, I listened to what the land is saying and entered in this matter, the land will open up. And this is getting at this other idea that the genius loci represents. This is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and you'll see it's about the pervading spirit of a place or the tutelary deity of a place. It is not about the person. It's about the place and how we get that context for ourselves and our actions in that place. This is a letter that Alexander Pope, famous English poet, wrote at the time that landscape gardening was taking on a distinctive English character, which was heavily influenced by Chinese landscape gardening in a book called 36 Views from the Emperor Kangxi that had come to England shortly before. And this passage is a marvelous one. It says, to build, to plant, whatever you intend, in all let nature never be forgot. Consult the genius of the place in all that tells the waters to rise or to fall, and be whatever Vitruvius was before. That point about Vitruvius is an interesting one. So who is Vitruvius? Well, everybody in Western culture knows this image. This is called Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci. And what this represents isn't a drawing of originality by da Vinci, but rather him trying to plot what Vitruvius said about the divine proportion of the human and how there are certain measurements that work out to make us somewhat circular or square in our metrics. And this drawing is, of course, a symbol of the Renaissance, but it's also a tribute to Vitruvius. And Vitruvius has given us the three foundational principles of all Western architecture. These laws, solidity, utility, and beauty, or firmitas, utilitas, and venustas, are the foundations of most architectural practice in the West. And I mean the entire West, not Western Canada, I mean the Western world. And this is Hadrian's garden here that I photographed a few years ago, where you can see some of those principles at work. But this idea of these three foundational principles of architecture are extremely widespread. If you read modern books on architecture, you'll almost always find them. But Vitruvius was about more than just those three things. Vitruvius was very influenced by the Italo-Etruscan conditions in which he was born. And that Italo-Etruscan perception was that there was a divine spirit inhabiting all spaces, and that man-made monumental space interacted with the sanctity of the space itself. And this is from the Aeneid. This is Virgil, the founding of Rome. So this is the story of when Aeneas comes from Troy and creates Rome before Romulus and Remus are born, which I'll come to in a moment. Geniumque loci peramque deorum tellurum. By the way, nobody knows how to pronounce Latin, so mine's as good as anybody else's. There's three different proposed pronunciations. We agreed to call it Genius Loci using that pronunciation. But Aeneas prayed to the spirit of the place and to Earth, the first of the gods. The day had come to found their destined city. Of course, Aeneas's daughter is the mother of Romulus and Remus. And everybody in the West knows this image. And what's interesting about this image, if you look at it, is you see a she-wolf, wild nature nurturing the babies that are the founders of Rome. You see the relationship between humanity and nature is one. This is not an estranged relationship. This is an intimate one, as deeply intimate as it could possibly be. Babies suckling at the breast of a wild she-wolf at the founding of Rome. But something strange happened that moved us away from that, as the Romans, who were the master engineers of the ancient world, and still some of the best engineers that ever were, started to discover their capacity to build to straight roads and aqueducts and to transform the earth. And they kind of lost that sense of the spirit of the place that was very deeply there at the founding. This is D.H. Lawrence commenting on the difference between the original Etruscans and the Romans in his really interesting little book, Etruscan Places. The old religion of the profound attempt of man to harmonize himself with nature changed with the Greeks and Romans into a desire to resist nature, till at last there should be nothing free in nature at all. All should be controlled, domesticated, and put to man's meaner uses. Now, when the Roman Empire collapsed, interestingly, in the Western world, you can find other threads of, through the Middle Ages of people more interested in the connection with nature. Think of St. Francis of Assisi, for example. But by the time of the Renaissance, that Roman thing is brought back in, and this is the Capitoline Hill, where that she-wolf statue is in the Capitoline Museum and the founding of Rome occurred. This is Michelangelo's square, where you see man on top of the horse dominating the round planet. This is the earth and we are on top of it. And René Descartes said in 1637, humans are the lords and masters of nature. So you can see suddenly in the Renaissance, we're sort of doubling down on this new Roman perception of we're in charge and the rest of the earth is there to serve us. And of course, if you bring that into North America, you have this idea of progress. And this wonderful painting, which is in the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, is called American Progress, or Progress as a Canadian would pronounce it. And what she is, this is in a book about how to go west and settle the West. And you see her carrying the book of knowledge and a telegraph line in her hands. Behind her follows the railways, the farmers with their plows, the miners with their picks, the settlers in their covered wagon, the telegraph line, everything. And she's driving out the wildness, the wolves, the indigenous people, and the buffalo, or the bison. So you can see this narrative about progress relies in this thing that D.H. Lawrence described of converting everything to the meaner uses, meaning the average uses, and driving out the first people, driving out the wildness, driving out the worldview that we belong in nature instead of the worldview that it's there to serve us and convert it. Now, this worldview has gotten us to tremendous wealth. It's created the prosperity for which the Western world and many other countries which have gotten on the program of generating wealth, it's made us very rich, but now we've hit the wall. The science is unequivocally clear that that idea that it's just here to serve us is causing us a big, big problem right now. So this is from IPBES. This is the scientific body that advises the Convention on Biological Diversity, which will be having a meeting in China this year, a COP, a Conference of the Parties this year, very important meeting for nature. Nature is declining globally at rates unprecedented in human history. 1 million plants and animals are at risk of extinction, and our own well-being is at risk too. This is from the chair of the equivalent science body for the Climate Convention. This is a statement in December last year. Science tells us the climate is already changing because of us. We're on a path to risking serious, pervasive, irreversible impacts. Climate change is already affecting people and nature around the world, and limiting to 1.5 degrees is not impossible, brackets, it's very necessary, but would mean unprecedented transitions in all aspects of society. In other words, we have to change our program here. This is the United Nations Development Program. The COVID-19 pandemic has unleashed a human development crisis. We're back to the 1980s level of developments in some places, lost all that progress in the last 40 years. And it was superimposed on unresolved tensions about the equitable distribution of wealth and also between people and the planet. And this is a speech if you're interested in nature and conservation and climate change and the state of the world, this is a very compelling speech the Secretary General of the UN gave in December. To put it simply, the state of the planet is broken. Humanity is waging war on nature. This is suicidal. Making peace with nature is the defining task of the 21st century. It must be the top priority for everyone, everywhere. Now, happily, this penny is beginning to drop at the serious world leadership level. China's President Xi Jinping has been talking about this in very explicit terms. We don't tend to hear this in the West we have some filters up right now that don't allow us to actually hear what's being said sometimes. This is from a speech he gave, 2020. The industrial civilization, while making us very wealthy, has caused ecological crises, biodiversity loss, and environmental damage. A sound ecosystem is essential for civilization. We need to take up our lofty responsibility. We need to respect nature, follow its laws, and protect it. That's the president of China. This is not the only time he's spoken like this, by the way. This is from the G7 Environment Ministers communique 2 weeks ago, May 21st. We may see something else this weekend coming from the heads of state who are meeting at the G7 in England. But this is a direct statement. We acknowledge with grave concern the unprecedented and interdependent crises of climate change and biodiversity loss pose an existential threat to nature, people, prosperity, and security. We need to move to a nature positive and climate resilient pathway and bend the curve of biodiversity loss. And then this, highly relevant to Canadians, reconciliation with the First People. This is from the principles document from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission a few years ago. Reconciliation between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians requires reconciliation with the natural world. Reconciliation will never occur unless we are also reconciled with the earth. We can't just resolve problems among ourselves, we must also resolve our relationship with the earth. So it is terribly exciting tonight that we have two of the best thinkers in the world about how Chinese landscape tradition affects Chinese society and the future vision of China, which includes a vision of eco-civilization, Dr. Yang Rui. And we have Dr. Leroy Little Bear speaking, who's one of the great indigenous thinkers on planet Earth. And they will explore these ideas about how we might bring this all together with potentially this idea of reviving the Genius Loci, just as we revived ideas from Rome and Greece in the Renaissance. Perhaps it's now time to revive ideas of the spirit of place, of the Genius Loci in the 21st century. It's in the Western tradition as well. And I think you'll find an amazing correspondence between that part of our culture in the West and these ideas that will come from Leroy and Yang Rui. More formally, Leroy is a founder of the Native American Studies Department at the University of Lethbridge. He served as chair there for 21 years. He's the founding director of the Harvard University Native American program. He was one of the initiators of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. He co-authored the books Pathways to Self-Determination, Native Indian Leaders' Perspectives on Self-Government, and also Quest for Justice, Aboriginal Rights in Canada. He's a member of the Order of Canada and an esteemed member of the Blackfoot Confederacy. He's a leading force in the creation of a modern treaty among Plains First Nations from both Canada and the United States called the Buffalo Treaty, a treaty of cooperation, renewal, and restoration. One of the great joys of my life is the fact that I know this brilliant man. Leroy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Harvey. And thanks very much for that introduction. Niston na ko kikas kiniwa. I naksix kano. Kenai no to tsitapi. I had just sang you my clan song. I belong to the Small Ropes Band of Ghana, and we belong to the Blackfoot Confederacy. I'm very honored to be with you this evening and to be able to share some thoughts with you. What we're going to be discussing this evening and what Harvey has just introduced us to is a very, very interesting topic but a very important topic for us Homo sapiens, human beings. But so that we understand and have a little bit of a background about what we're going to be talking about, let me give a little bit of that background. You see, when a society comes into existence, however that society comes into existence, sooner or later, that society claims a territory. And within that territory, it has a mutual relationship over a period of time with everything within that totality of that environment, the sky, the land, the plants, the animals, and so on. In other words, with the totality of the environment. And sooner or later, and again, over a period of time, that society, more or less, I don't think there's any specific time that it says so, and sometimes it may never say so, but more or less comes to kind of an agreement that says this is how we as a society are going to live on this land. This is how we're going to interpret our relationships with this total environment. This is how we're going to interpret reality. Okay? So, in other words, that notion about how we're going to interpret things, how we're going to do things, is what we usually refer to as a culture. And because of the so many, hang-ups, let me put it that way, around the word culture, I prefer to use the phrase a collective agreement of the society. Now, that collective agreement usually has something like an esoteric theoretical aspect to it. That theoretical esoteric aspect is really what we refer to as the paradigms or the metaphysics of that society. It has customs. Customs are the accepted ways of doing things. And of course, it also has social values. And the values are those standards that we use for, you know, judging whether or not people within the society are following the customs, the beliefs, and so on. Those values might even speak to giving rewards to people who follow the rules of the society. See, well, especially that esoteric part, those metaphysics, is our interpretation of what comes to us. It's almost like we're a computer and it's all the input. And we say, well, all that intake, this is how we're going to interpret it. See, you know how scientists like to be very objective. Well, a Nobel Prize winning scientist, Steven Weinberg, said, you know, there's an objective world out there. But to be a true objective world, there shouldn't be any humans in the picture. As soon as there's a human being in the picture, it becomes an interpretation of that objective reality out there. So in other words, those beliefs, those metaphysics, those paradigms really are just an interpretive template of what we think that objective world is out there. See, and one of the things we have to keep in mind is that we fight wars over those interpretive templates. We argue amongst ourselves as different societies, saying to each other, no, my interpretation, my society's interpretation is better than yours. Mine is it. Say, well, when we look at Blackfoot, where I come from, and I know this to be true amongst other indigenous people in my part of the world, that those metaphysics consist of seeing the world. In other words, we've said this is how we're going to interpret the world based on the following. And that is, hey, everything is seen as being in a state of flux. Things are always moving, changing, interchanging, transforming, and so on. That flux is really consists of energy waves as opposed to matter or particles. Another part of it is that everything that has movement is alive, it's animate. So we see everything as animate. There's no such thing in Blackfoot as inanimate, not having life. See, we see the world as being all interrelated. That's why even in our prayers, we say, all my relations. I'm related to all those people out there. So that Harvey was mentioning the Buffalo Treaty. I've got a copy of this Buffalo Treaty. Well, there's a rock down at the bottom. That rock we would refer to as buffalo rib stones, and is part of all my relations. When we were working towards establishing that Buffalo Treaty, we always had a seat at the table, not as advisor, but at the table for the buffalo. And he joined the conversation. See, now moving on with those metaphysics, everything being interrelated, hey, our languages reflect all of that notions, so that because it's about state of flux, our language is about motion, it's about action, it's about processes. See, and because there's always a state of flux, we try to look for something that's a regular occurrence in that flux. Well, land becomes very important because land will change because of the flux, but not as quickly as other things. And that's why land is very important in our way. We can at least refer to the land, at least for the time being. We can hang our hat on it for at least the time being. See, so when we're talking about landscape, well, that landscape really has all this spirit. It has that life in it. And it's all about my relations. Those animals out there relate to that landscape. The land itself relates to us, and we relate to it. A good example of that connection is water. I am, and we as human beings, adult human beings, are 60 to 70% water. So that water out there is my brother, my sister. See, I can relate to it. See, so because everything is alive, that notion of, being all related, we become part of the overall picture, the totality. We fit into it as opposed to being separate from it. When we look at the modern world today, it is, as Harvey was explaining at the beginning, it's all what I would refer to as constructed environment. It is a constructed environment and not what nature and all my relations, those animals, the earth itself, how they have shaped that. See, so when we're talking landscape, it's how the river shapes the land. I live in a windy country. It's how the wind shapes the land. And I, as a human being, have to fit in and make peace with the wind because it shapes the land and it shapes how all those other beings, whether they're coyotes, whether they're bears, and so on, how they react to that overall landscape. What connects us all, in other words, all my relations, is that spirit. That spirit is those energy waves that's common to all of us. And that's why they are all my relations. And that's why we respect everything that surrounds us. So landscape really is about the totality and the relational aspect. And we as humans are a very small part and play a very small part of that relational network. And if we play around with it too much, hey, I used to text, as I tell people, I used to text Neanderthal man. Well, Neanderthal man is no longer here. Well, we may not be around in the distant future. So that's something we have to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leroy. So clear, so compelling, so important to us who wish to practice reconciliation to fully understand each other and how we all see the world. And brilliantly clear. And I'm now going to turn to another very, very old way of seeing the world, perhaps the oldest continuous civilization, which is China. And so many thoughts about how to live in the world have been held by Chinese thinkers and scholars. And the opportunity to learn about how the Chinese civilization has seen the world. Pretty much everybody on this call will know that China has become the second largest economy in the world. It's had cities that have gone from 35,000 people in the 1980s to 14 million people today, with more buildings over 50 stories than Manhattan. A fantastic road system, subways, but it also has this deeply anchored culture in a way of seeing the world. And we're so lucky that Dr. Young Ray is with us tonight. He's the co-founder, head, and professor of the Department of Landscape Studies at the School of Architecture in Tsinghua University in Beijing. He's also the director of the National Park Research Institute of Tsinghua University and vice chairman of the Chinese Society of Landscape Architecture. He was a visiting scholar at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And starting in the 1990s, he proposed the idea of there being a national park system in China. He's one of the pioneers of the idea of national parks, which in China is now the focus of their protected area system. He's won awards for his national park planning ideas. And he, in particular with the Milai Snow Mountain Master Plan, he received a very distinguished award for it. I had the pleasure of being a visiting scholar at Tsinghua with Dr. Ray, Dr. Young in December, and learned some of the things that I think he'll share with you tonight that just struck me of how much depth there is to this concept of relationship between Chinese culture and heaven, the earth, and the relationships that he will now share with all of us. Thank you very much, Ray, for being here. I'm so thrilled. Such a pleasure that you could be with us in Canada.
Thank you very much, Harvey. Shui, could you please share with your screen? Is this the full screen, Shui? Okay, thank you very much, Harvey, for your introduction. And I think it's a tough task for me to introduce the concept of Chinese landscape. I would like to call it Shan Shui because the landscape in English could be translated into Chinese for several terms, such as 风景、山水、景观, and 景. Today, I will try to explain the concept of 山水 and also the wisdom and the practice of 山水 because I like this translation very much, 山水. So next slide. As you may know, the Chinese character is pictograph. So you can see 3,000 years ago during ancient Chinese time, we have different Chinese character of mountains and waters. The top one is mountain, and then and the other one is the water flow, is 水, 山 and 水. So you could say on the left, the 山 and the 水, the mountain and the water is quite concrete. And nowadays, since the 1935, you could say the Chinese character of 山水 is abstract. So it's very interesting to see the physical level. 山 and 水 is the most important physical element for Chinese people to represent the nature. Next slide. And also, this old man, you may know very well because he is the first teacher in China. It's Kongzi, Confucius, and he was born in 551 BC, and about 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. So he tried to link the physical part of mountain and water into the physical or the mind level. Try to make a linkage between the mind and the physical element. And he said that the wise people, the wise men like water. So he found some similarity between the wise men and the characteristic of water, because the wise men like water. Water has the characteristic of flexible and clear, and also a lot of maybe transformative, this kind of characteristics. So he said, wise people like water, and the 智者, 仁者乐山, and the upright man, the upright person like the mountain, because the mountain also has the characteristic like mountains. The mountain is also upright, and so he found he said that the nice people, or the people who is heartedness like mountains. So you could say that in the Shan Shui, the mountain and the water, these two Chinese character not only represent the physical element, but also the psychic, the spiritual element. This is the ideas from the Confucius. Next slide. And in Wei Jin dynasty, Wei Jin is a very special dynasty about 2,000 years ago. And the people would like to go to the mountains and water, to the nature, and to enjoy their life. These 7 people named the Zulin Qixian because they would like to the bamboo area and to have some recreation, to have some activities, because they think that only in the nature, in the forest, they could find their peaceful, their happiness, this kind of things. So about 2,000 years ago, the Chinese people like nature very much. The mountains, waters, forest, all this kind of natural environment be their very good places to stay. Okay, next slide, Shu Yu. So you can see the traditional paintings from the cities, from the maybe in the farmland, and also from some wilderness area, just like Harvey's paper 3C. So we could say that this is the Qingming Shanghe Tu. Qingming is a Chinese festival in spring, and on this day, it's about in April 5th. On this day, you could see in the city of Kaifeng, now located in Henan province, the different the mountains, the forest, and the rivers, the buildings, the bridges, and the people, and they are living in harmony in the Song dynasty about 1,000 years ago. Next slide, Shu Yu. Also, this is maybe we could call it farmland. Oh, it's not in the city, it's not in the wilderness, but it's in the shared landscape, just like Harvey described. This is a painting of Fuchun River. Fuchun River is located in Anhui province and the Zhejiang province. So in this painting, you could also see the mountains, the rivers, and if you could see very in very detail, you can see some people. So Chinese people, they don't separate the human beings from the nature. They just see as the human beings as one part of the nature. Next slide. This is a very sacred mountain in China. It's the Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Shu Yu, could you please? Okay, so we could see a very famous mountain. I also could see it's a protected area. It's Mount Huangshan, located in Anhui province. So you can see a lot of ancient paintings about Mount Huangshan. You also can see the mountains, water flow, and also there is some small buildings in this mountain with people with different activities in this mountain. So for the Chinese people, the man and nature is always get together. They did not separate the human beings from the nature, and also they see the mountains, the rivers, the water flows, the forest is one. Next slide. So we could say in Chinese context, Shan Shui creation represents all of the landscape activities. This is a picture I drawing to try to understand the Shan Shui or the Chinese, how Chinese people understand the landscape. I think there are 8 aspects. That is Dao. Dao is the philosophy, and the De is the values. 理道德礼数用智相义 principles, techniques, functions, mechanisms, images, and meanings. So this is Chinese Tai Chi. If you know some knowledge about the yin and the yang, so we could say that in the Shan Shui concept, not only on the level of theory, but also on the level of practice. And they exist in 4 fields. It's the conservation, it's the planning, it's the governance, and also it's the design. For these 4 fields, we could say we could all of the 8 aspects 道德礼数用智相义 could be found in the conservation, planning, governance, and design. Okay, next. It's very interesting. This old people actually is the Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is older than Confucius, and his philosophy is 无为而治, is 道家, doing nothing that goes against nature. So it's very interesting. He said that you should not do much. If you are doing too much, then it will not only hurt the nature, but also hurt yourself. So he suggested doing nothing that goes against nature. So this is his main philosophy. Another people is Zhuangzi. Zhuangzi is, I think I like him very much because he wrote an article on the equality of things about 2000 years ago. And he wrote that heaven and earth live together with me, and everything and I are one. So he saw everything is equal. They have the equal right, and the human beings is just has the equal right as the animals, as the waters, as the mountains. Human beings is not in a it's not in the Lord. Human beings is just one equal part of the universe. So his philosophy is very nice, and I would like to suggest that you, if you are interested in, you could read the paper on the equality of things. It's wow, it's wonderful. Okay, next slide. So this slide is Guanzi. Guanzi is not a philosopher, is not a teacher, but he was a politician, not a modern politician, but a politician 2,000 years ago in Zhanguo dynasty, and he is a leader of the country of Qi, nowadays located in the Shandong province. And he said that man and nature adapt to each other. And the result, if they adapt to each other, the result is great beauty. So this is his philosophy. And he applied his philosophy to rule his country. The whole country and the cities and the peoples and the farmland and also everything. He used this kind of philosophy. So you could say he said 人与天调，然后天地之美生. Next slide. So like Guanzi in Qi country, for 1,000 years in the agricultural civilization in China, the Chinese government at that time, they do conservation or doing conservation with a lot of wisdom and practice, such as 五岳 and 四渎. 五岳 is the 5 great mountains, and 四渎 is the 5 most important rivers. So you can see the right picture is the Taishan. Taishan, I think, is the first national protected area in China, because at that time the Qin dynasty set a city named Tai'an to manage this mountain protected areas, and the city and the mountain are so integrate. They integrate very well, just like 珠联璧合 is a Chinese term. Maybe some of the Chinese colleagues could translate this Chinese term into English. 珠联璧合，或者说我们可以说水乳交融。Anyway, it's a match perfect between the city and the mountain, between the man and the nature. Next slide. Not only the space management, but also the ancient Chinese government, they cite a lot of policies and regulations to conserve the landscape. Like some books, 齐民要术 or 四民月令, they told the people, during the spring, you could not hunting or you could not fishing, or you should do something. You should not do something. It's the policies, regulations 2,000 years ago. Next slide. Not only the Han nationality, you may know that there are 56 nationalities in China. The above content is the Chinese Han nationalities appearance, and this is some minorities like the Tibetan people or some people in the Yunnan province. They also have sacred trees, mountains, and lakes, and they conserve the nature, the landscape very well. Next slide. And also you could see the Jiuzhou is a zoning map in ancient time. The Chinese government divided the whole country into 9 states. It's Jiuzhou according to the mountains and the rivers, and to plan or to manage, to governance these 9 states according to the different environmental situation, such as the climate or the soil, all those different kind of things. Next slide. This is a concept of Feng Shui. I just mentioned about Shan Shui. This is another Chinese term, Feng Shui. Feng Shui is a technique for Chinese people to plan and design their cities, their places, their villages, even their tombs. So Feng means wind, and Shui means the water. So Feng Shui, how can I say, maybe in ancient time, they try to find a nice or a nicer macro climate for the cities, for the villages, for the buildings, for the tombs. So Feng Shui is a system. Actually, it's very complicated. It combined in some Chinese philosophy and with geometry and different analysis together to develop a technique how to select the cities, how to select the place of the cities, of the villages, of the buildings. It's very interesting, and also it's very complicated. Next slide. So you could see the Hongchun village located in Anhui province, very close to the Mount Huangshan. This is a result of the Feng Shui. You could see this village, they have a moon lake, and to adjust or to give a better macro climate of this village. And also you could see in the landscape, it's very beautiful of this village. Now it's a world cultural heritage. Next slide. Not only for the living people, but also for the dead people. This is the Ming tombs located in Beijing. There are 13 tombs for the Ming dynasty, the emperors and his families. So you also could see that the tombs located very well with a relationship to the mountains, to the rivers. Next slide. And also this is the Hani terraced fields in Yunnan province. You can see how agricultural land to get along with the forest, to get along with the village, and they are very harmony. They just one system. The people on the main element is an equal part of this system. So they are in harmony, living in harmony with nature. Okay. And not only those villages and cities, but also the infrastructures, such as the Dujiangyan, located in Sichuan province, near to the city of Chengdu. And this irrigation system provide a lot of good farmland for the people living in this area. And also it's a world cultural heritage because it's very beautiful, and you could not even realize it's a dam or it's a irrigation system when you visited this area. It's just like a big landscape, and it's very harmony. The aggregation system, the mountains, rivers, everything is so harmony. Okay. So not in a big landscape, but also for the gardens, for the small gardens. This is the Yuanming Yuan, which was destroyed in 100 years ago by the war. But you could also say the gardens and the buildings, from the small gardens to the big landscape to the infrastructures. Chinese people trying to integrate the nature and the human beings, to integrate the mountains, rivers, and human beings together. Okay, the last slide. So I think the core of the Shan Shui philosophy is that human beings is just the equal part of the universe. This is the core of the Shan Shui philosophy. So for the COP15 of this October, just like Harvey mentioned, the conference theme is building a shared future for all life on Earth. I think it represents a had the spirit of the core of the Shan Shui. We should think how to apply the Shan Shui wisdom in this very specific ecological civilization. So I would like to beg your pardon because my English is poor, and also to explain this Chinese philosophy. Even in Chinese is difficult. So that is my presentation. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you.
Ray, that was very clear, very easy to understand, and absolutely magnificent. Thank you so much for explaining Shan Shui and the other dimensions of the unity of humans and nature. Absolutely wonderful presentation. And I was struck by the connections between some of the thoughts and what you expressed and some of what Leroy expressed about how we perceive ourselves in this world. Maybe we can put Leroy's image up too, so we can have the question and answer period. If we can get Leroy's up here with us, along with Ray. But I would like to first, the first thing I want to do is, Ray, you mentioned a phrase where you wanted some help translating. I bet you Jia can tell us what it was you were trying to say. Jia, would you mind sharing with us about the city and the mountain being integrated at Mount Tai? What it was that Ray was saying, please?
well, 珠联璧合. So it is about pearls and jade like match perfectly together. So and Professor Yang also spoke about 水乳交融. So water and cream comes together beautifully. So it really meant to say that two things can come and combine and connect very nicely together. And probably in the end, it actually creates a greater beauty than the individual items.
Super, Joe. I'm going to ask you to wait one more minute too, because there's a phrase that you and I have talked about, which is a phrase that President Xi is using a lot when he talks about building eco-civilization. And Ray ended this talk talking about this idea of eco-civilization, which is actually in the Chinese constitution, to build an eco-civilization. And there's a phrase about lush mountains and green and clean rivers. Could you use that phrase that's very common in Chinese understanding? Jia, please just explain the phrase, say the phrase in Chinese and then explain it.
Sure, it's 绿水青山就是金山银山，是那个习近平主席的应该是2005年的时候发表的这个，当时还在他是在应该是还在浙江省做省委书记的时候。So the saying translates into English would be green mountains and clear waters, clear rivers are the equivalent or as good as mountain of gold and river of gold. So it basically indicates how precious beautiful nature and clean, pristine environment is. It's as good as gold.
Perfect, thanks. And what's so interesting is this is a phrase that President Xi is using regularly to promote policies in China. So, So just to stimulate the conversation, people are welcome to put questions in the chat if you have some. But I'd like to ask a question of Ray to just explain briefly, what is the ecological red line in China? What is that land use thing that's just happened that has resulted in protecting 25% of China recently? Could you just explain briefly what that is to the audience?
Well, and the 生态红线 red line is a concept raised by Professor Gao Jixi, who is working for the Ministry of Environmental Protection. And the Chinese government accept the idea and make some laws and legislations about the red line. The red line is try to prevent the human activities inside the boundaries. They control the human activities, the human use inside the red lines. So for me, I would like to suggest that inside the red line, it's in a different kind of protected areas, such as national parks, such as natural reserves, such as some maybe in the natural parks, the national forest park, national wetland park, this kind of things. For me, the red line is a concept with very strong linkage to the protected areas. Now the Chinese protected areas cover about 18% of the whole country, and then the red line is about 25 or 30% of the Chinese line. Is that clear, Harvey?
Yes, yeah, that's great, Ray. It's just, I thought people would be interested to know that China has literally said, we will dedicate that much of our country. And of
Sorry,
course,
I could not hear you.
No, that's good. In Canada, of course, we have a policy of protecting 25% by 2025 and 30% by 2030 that the federal government has just recently developed and announced funding for. And we need to see our provinces and so on come on board, because if the Chinese can do it, we should be able to do it in Canada, I think. And okay.
Catherine?
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Your comment was good. We have some questions. From Vance Martin, who's joining us from the United States. How is the essential and important philosophy of relationship to be made real or actualized in political and business planning? Any ideas there?
I would say that this whole notion should figure into the business planning. Why? Well, number one, in many cases, when we're talking about business planning, we are talking about corporations. And as we all know, corporations are persons. And those persons should be as responsible for the environment as other persons like us, humans, and so on. And I think really what it is that what I've been trying to say for the past little while is we have to sit back and reflect. And COVID-19 is giving us that opportunity to sit back and reflect on how we do things. How we do things. And so if those metaphysics that we use on a daily basis, we should reflect and ask ourselves, where are those metaphysics taking us? Where are they leading us? What path are they taking us down? You know, and maybe there are other interpretive tools that might work also. Let's examine those other interpretive tools. We're not saying forget what you have and adopt totally somebody else's. We're saying examine others. And by doing that, you will widen your perspective, and therefore creativity will come in with that diversity, and therefore more answers to the issues that face us. So really, diversity is strength.
Thanks, Leroy. I would make a comment that there's a really big effort globally now to promote the idea of an equitable, nature positive, and carbon neutral world, heavily supported by business organizations that are interested in nature and the climate, such as the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, the World Economic Forum, Business for Nature, Imagine. These are all groups that I've had the privilege of working with who are very concerned about these same issues, and they're looking at this nature positive idea as a way of managing towards a positive outcome that's sort of within their reach, just like being carbon neutral is within a business's reach. And of course, this question of equity is very important to going forward, as we're seeing widening disparities and increased suffering and so on. So it's interesting that there is this critical mass of businesses. There'll also be something called the Circular Economy Conference coming up in Canada, a global conference on this idea that you shouldn't waste anything, that everything should be reused. There's a lot of thought, actually, conversations going on in China like that as well. And I wonder if we could move the next question to Professor Yang. Could you explain a little bit more the elements of that Tai Chi drawing that you did about the 8 principles and the Tai Chi drawing? Just what's the core idea there? Can you hear me, Ray? No, I guess not. So sorry about that. We've got an issue of the connection. So I'm going to just a second. Don, we have a question from Don Hill. How does the Chinese perspective concerning sacredness in the land, the Chinese leadership under President Xi, concord with China, presently described as the biggest polluter on the planet? I might take a shot at answering that one because I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about that. China is a big, complicated country, just like the United States of America is a big, complicated country. And so there's things that are consistent and things that are inconsistent about every culture. But what China has done, and this is a very direct commitment from the top, which is to say we are going to change course and create an eco-civilization. And China recently committed to carbon neutrality by 2060 and has also moved a lot of things ahead. No culture is perfect, but I've been struck by, as a Canadian living here, how we don't learn anything positive about China. We just hear bad things. And there's a lot of good things happening there as well that can help us to find a pathway forward that isn't what I shall call a negative pathway that seems to be the one that we've been focused on too much lately, for my opinion. We got to find a positive way out, and the relationship with the natural world is potentially one of those ways out. I just, one more question. I think we've lost Ray. So perhaps with that, we've used our time up. I'm going to ask Catherine Croston from the Art Gallery of Alberta and Zhao Wang to take over again. But before we go, I just want to talk about one practical implication of thinking of the spirit of the place that I heard in a wonderful presentation from an Indigenous biologist in Montana about the highway system that they have in Montana, kind of modeled on the highway crossing structures in Banff. And this story from Whisper Camel Means goes like this. The Montana Department of Highways wanted to widen Highway 93 across the Kootenai Salish reservation. The Kootenai Salish people had authority to be involved in the conversation because it crossed their land. This is the road between the Flathead Valley and Missoula for people who know Montana. And they said, the road must fit into the land. There is a spirit of the place that the road must respect. And that is the best mitigated highway for wildlife in the United States. So this idea of bringing the spirit of the place to ground in a culture has a direct application that can make the world a better place for nature and for the people also. So it's kind of a great story. She just presented this last week at a webinar for Yellowstone to Yukon and the White Museum, which I thought was fascinating to see the application. So it's too much fun for me. I could talk forever about this with my friends, Leroy and Ray. Please, Catherine and Ja, take over and say our parting words.
Thank you so much, Harvey. I just want to say on behalf of the Art Gallery of Alberta, I would like to extend our sincerest thanks to tonight's speakers, Dr. Leroy Little Bear, Dr. Yang Ri, and Dr. Harvey Locke. Your wisdom and the thoughts that you've shared with us this evening have been inspiring and so generous. So you've given us many things to think about in terms of how we, as just one small part of nature, can live in and better respect the land, the water, and everything in the environment that we share with all of our living beings. I would also like to thank our colleagues at the China Institute for their partnership and assistance with this presentation, and to the Poole Center of Design for their support of this program. I'm very happy to announce that the Art Gallery of Alberta will be reopening to the public on the weekend of June 19th and 20th, and we will be having a free admission day on Sunday, June 20th, in recognition of National Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st. So I do hope you will all take the opportunity to come to the AGA to see the Cornelia Oberlander Genius Loci exhibition that catalyzed tonight's important and impactful conversation. Thank you so much. And here I would like to welcome Zhao Wang.
Thank you, Catherine. I will definitely be there at the exhibition, and I hope you can all visit as well. So that was a truly illuminating conversation we had tonight. And thank you, all our panelists, as Catherine already did, Dr. Harvey Locke, Dr. Little Bear, and Dr. Young for sharing your insights with all of us. It's quite a treat. I also like to, again, thank all the colleagues at AGA and China Institute for organizing this webinar. And finally, a big thanks to all the audience members with us here today. Please stay tuned for also more events we're planning in the coming month. Finally, enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Leroy. Wonderful. Bye-bye.
Bye.